Welcome to the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast, brought to you by Butler Vet Insurance, hosted by Bill Butler. The Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is for veterinarians and practice managers who are looking to learn about working on their practice instead of in their practice. Each episode, we will bring you successful, proven blueprints from others both inside and outside the veterinary industry. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast, where the worlds of animal health, entrepreneurship, and business ideas converge. I am your host, Bill Butler, and today we have a truly inspiring guest joining us, Meghan Bingham from Granite Peak Associates. Starting over 2 decades ago with a summer job at a neighborhood vet, Meghan's passion for veterinary medicine has seen her journey from kennel assistant to the heights of veterinary practice management. She worked her way up from becoming a practice manager, transforming a small, bustling practice into a 12-doctor entrepreneurship dream. Her career trajectory didn't stop there. Meghan later took the role of senior operations manager, overseeing operations at 25 different urgent, emergency, and general practice facilities, pushing them towards their peak potential. Now at Granite Peak Associates, Meghan finds herself in what she calls her dream job, where she enhances processes for those dedicating their lives to pets, setting up veterinary practices for success. Not only has she earned a BA in communications, but she also is recognized as a leader in the field, currently holding a position of vice president for the Houston Veterinary Practice Managers Alliance, and recently serving on the board of directors for the Veterinary Hospital Managers Association. A voracious reader, she also, as if you're watching along on this, she has Star Wars and Lego aficionado. Thanks to her husband, firefighter, and 10-year-old son, she brings a unique blend of personal and professional insights to today's discussion. So stay tuned as we dive into processes and strategies to help drive successful veterinary practice with Meghan as we explore how to adapt any of these for your practice environment. Welcome, Meghan.
Thank you, Bill. I sound lovely. That was fantastic. Thank you.
We all do on introductions on podcasts. That's kind of the deal. Well, welcome to today's podcast. And why don't you tell our audience today? I kind of gave the LinkedIn bio there, but why don't you tell our listeners today kind of how we got connected at Granite Peak Associates and how you wound up there and kind of your trajectory in the vet world and animal health.
I mean, you can go anywhere in vet med, right? There's a job for everyone. I hooked up with Granite Peak. Jared, the CEO, sent me a message on LinkedIn and said, we are looking for a certified veterinary practice manager. And I thought for sure it was a scam, right? Like all the other messages that you get on LinkedIn. And I was in my yes phase and I was like, let's just see where this goes. And so Granite Peak is a CPA firm that's focused on veterinarians. And so I'm there for the non-tax related stuff. So as we're going through P&Ls and looking at budgets and that kind of thing, then, they say like, oh, your COGS are a little bit out of line with industry standards. And then the clients would say like, okay, how do I fix that? And they'd be like, well, you can adjust your prices. So now I'm here to like get down to the nitty gritty. We're talking marketing, we're talking staffing, we're talking all of the things operationally that can help improve your business and make your P&L a little bit cleaner and a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. And so you took all of your experience working in practices to help advise for a business that, looks at the high level stuff from a tax and planning perspective. And now they brought you on board to assist internally with their clients, do what you were doing on the front line, but now in an advisory role instead of a frontline role.
Right. And so now I can help 150 people instead of just my one practice. It's really like the dream job. Also, like no one's ever going to call out to me. I don't ever have to run a payroll. I don't have to fix a toilet, like all of these things that you have to do as a practice manager. So I get to take all the sweat equity that I've put in and now hopefully share and make it a little bit easier for someone else.
So when we were doing some prep for this, I sent you say, hey, what should we chat about? You have a lot of expertise in the vet world, veterinary animal health world from a management perspective. And the number one question that you sent back was, I love all things operational. That was actually the response. And so, within that, I think there's so many different things. So you've got a strong passion for all things related to operations. And I think there's a couple elemental components to that, right? So like foundational elements for handbooks, job descriptions, raises, that sort of thing. So why don't you talk about what you see in your experience in talking about operational aspects of a vet practice and things that veterinarians necessarily don't love dealing with. It falls to the practice manager. Hey, we got to get our employee handbook up to speed. So why don't you talk about some of those operational components?
Sure, and that's great, right? If you do have a manager to pass it off to, that's fantastic. But I think there's so many small practices out there that just have the DVM that's trying to do their best to practice medicine and run a business. And then, man, the waters get muddy on that. So I've found, talking to clients at Granite Peak, I'd say, well, what does your handbook say? And they'd say like, oh, we don't have a handbook or a job description or any of that kind of stuff. So I just feel like that's the time, right? Your handbook is your Bible. You list out your do's and your don'ts, and you can make them, as long as they're within federal and state laws, you can kind of make it whatever you want. If you want to talk about appropriate nail length for your technicians, that they can't come in with, 2.5-inch long nails or facial piercings or any of those kind of things. When we talk about vacation accrual or requesting time off, like those are the things that we can put in our handbook and have rules. And so we're fair moving forward, right? We're not kind of picking and choosing who we're allowing these benefits for. And the same with job descriptions. Like, we're setting up our team for success if we know what's expected of them and how we're going to judge them and what we're going to teach them. Like, it's so important to form that foundation so that we're all moving forward on the same page.
Well, and I think, I'm in Minnesota, and practices all over the country are different. We have a lot of legislation happening on a state and national level. FTC just rolled out, can't have non-competes. There's a lot of conversation happening right now in the vet community about that. Overall, I mean, in my industry, insurance, we have the same thing, a lot of non-competes. But so staying up to speed on those things and, having a resource, if they're a client at Granite Peak, obviously, hey, what's happening, you can reach out to your, like, as you mentioned, 150 plus practices that you work with across the United States and say, hey, here's some things that are coming down the pike on non-competes, on full-time salary, that component, and how exempt, not exempt. Or in Minnesota, we had sick and safe time get put in this year. And so that's mandatory. And making sure that your employee we just had ours rewritten this year to make sure we comply with the Minnesota stuff. So I was doing the same things you're talking about, but it's not a put it on the shelf and forget about it.
No.
It's a living document that needs to be updated, right?
Definitely. It definitely needs to be a living document it's really like kind of how I work on SOPs. Like, the thing that's giving you the most trouble, the hiccups that you run into time and time again, that's what we need to address. So if there's, call outs every Monday morning, let's write it in our handbook. Let's have a policy on this. And then let's dole out fairly the repercussions. I think that's so important.
Now, I heard you mention something there, every Monday. And I think a lot of practices don't meet every Monday or every Friday or every Wednesday. They have a monthly meeting, or they have a meeting every 6 months. Why don't you talk about that for just a second? And your, as your bio states, 20-year plus experience in practice management, working your practice. How important do you think that is, that weekly check-in versus that monthly or more?
The business is so busy, and there's all these different aspects, right? There's the DVMs, the technicians, the front desk. Sometimes you've got kennel and boarding and grooming, and they all kind of run in their own ecosystem, but they all have to work together. So if we're not checking in and disseminating information, like, how is the person working in the kennels in the back supposed to know that we changed our policy on taking leashes from clients? Like, so there needs to be some sort of form of communication. My staff, like, I had a staff of 50, and I rarely had all team meetings, because anybody who's got, it could be a staff of 4, and that these large team meetings are going to turn into like just a disaster. So I really focused on, I would start with my leads. I would have a monthly doctor's meeting, and then I would have a monthly lead meeting, and then I would have the different sections. And so I would disseminate the information down through all of these different channels. And then I would have a weekly memo that broke out, like, this is for everyone to know, and then this is what the different sections need to know. And so that really helped with, like, upcoming holiday schedules or changes in protocol or bringing in a new product. Like, it was just easier to have this memo that went out every week than to try to, like, wrangle all these cats together and have them pay attention.
Yeah. in the military, and I've talked about some previous podcasts, background in the military personally, and the scope of control is 4 to 6. You can't manage more than 4 to 6 people. And so if you've got a staff of 12 and you're trying to have a 12-person staff meeting, it's going to be a problem. So you've got the the person that is your DVM liaison or coordinator that manages the DVM team, and then your tech team. And, so you have to break, you can't, as the practice manager or the DVM, like you can't manage a team of 15 and think that you're going to disseminate stuff down and individually manage that. You've got to have some levels of management in there, as kind of talking about a further question that I had for you about scaling a practice, because you took a single vet practice to a 12 vet practice. Well, it's not just 12 vets, it's all the support staff that go with them to get to that 12, right?
Yes. And that's huge. Right. And I will say though, that my doctors were my most difficult group to manage. They were the most demanding and the least compliant. So that's always like, the more doctors you have, more problems. And to be fair, I need everyone to know that like I hired them back in the day when it was easy to hire a veterinarian. So I don't want anyone to think that like I'm a miracle worker these days, because times are definitely changed.
But to scale, a further question about scale a little bit later, is having those foundational pieces in place. Like you can't scale without foundation, right?
Right.
So, you talked about handbook. How important do you think job descriptions are in today's modern vet practice?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This episode of the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is sponsored by Butler Vet Insurance. Being an insurance agent at Butler Vet Insurance, I've seen firsthand the difficulties veterinarians face insuring their practices. But did you know that we wrote the book on veterinary insurance? It's called Protecting Your Veterinary Practice: Insider Insurance Secrets Every Veterinarian Must Know. It's not just a book, it's a comprehensive guide that speaks to the unique challenges and insurance solutions for the veterinary community. With over 20 years experience from cyber liability to business auto and workers' compensation, our aim at Butler Vet Insurance is to reduce the stress of insurance for those dedicated to animal care. If you're a veterinary practice owner or manager and looking for some guidance on your insurance, follow our insurance blueprint. Discover the Butler Vet Insurance difference, and together let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. Butler Vet Insurance, reducing the stress of insurance.
I think if you have more than 2 people doing the same job, if you've got more than 2 technicians, more than 2 CSRs, you got to have a job description, right? We've got to be able to go back and say, this is what's expected of you. And this goes for all of the things. Like you can account for this. If I've got a pregnant mommy, I need to be able to send them with a job description to their doctor and say, what can you do?
Sure.
And so like having that, can you lift 50 pounds? Can you be around loud noises? Like you're going to be exposed to bites. You're going to be exposed to blood. Like there's just some things that we need to put in to these job descriptions so that there's no surprises. I expect you to work 40 hours if you're full time. I expect you to do 8 hours of CE a year. Like all of these things that we expect of our employees should be in here so that we can refer back to them. Either you're doing well and you're getting a raise, or you're not doing so well and we're going to do a performance improvement plan. Like it all starts with the job description.
These are your expectations from an insurance standpoint. You mentioned about, you're a pregnant mom. Here's what can you do from a job description perspective as you progress in the pregnancy. The other components to that from an insurance side, because, workers' compensation claims do happen in the vet world. Big surprise, shock.
Right.
People are going to get bit or things are going to happen at the practice. And so you can use that same job description after the workers' compensation claim has been filed to say, hey, so-and-so got bit, they've got stitches and a bandage. What can they do in the practice to have them recover on the job, which is an important component to insurance, is recovery at work instead of recovery at home, because that drives up the workers' compensation claim. Mm-hmm. So again, having that outline detailed job description. And again, those don't need to be reviewed as heavily as an employee handbook, potentially, just because there isn't as much change. But again, that's something that needs to be looked at probably more than just once every 5 years.
Oh, for sure. And I think if you get a new toy, like if you bring in a new piece of equipment, and that's included in their job description. And I like to leave those best, like So I grew up kennel technician, receptionist. I've done the things, but I did the things 20 years ago. So now I would depend on my leads to really go through and look at the job functions and making sure that all of our bases were covered. And I also would have different expectations for different, I had a lead technician job description, and then I let 1 and 2 levels, so that it's important, I think, for, the veterinary industry. It's kind of like a sink or swim. We throw somebody in, maybe they know it, maybe they don't. The doctor's busy. They grab them and say, hey, do this. Well, if they don't know how to do that, people pleasers just say oh, okay. But then that's a liability, right? So if we know that this person is a level 1 technician, maybe we're not going to have them intubate the kitten. There's just some rules and regs of this is your lane. Let's stay in it for now.
Well, I think also, and this came up on some prior podcasts about career progression inside the vet industry. It's not just technician or certified technician, depending on your state and the title based on the state, but in licensure. But, if you've got level 1 technician, level 2 technician, lead technician, it shows that younger person who's hungry to be in animal health and the animal health business world, so to speak. Hey, this is a career progression that I could have. I can go from technician 1 to technician 2 to lead technician. I want to be the lead technician. Well, here's the job title and description. It gives them something to work for versus just saying, hey, do you want to come work at my vet practice as a veterinary technician?
Right.
Sure.
I love that. Yes. It gives them room to grow, because what do? I want to employ the people that want to continue growing and continue to contribute. And so I would recommend having a salary range that's posted so that we kind of know where we are and what we want to achieve. And then I would post those job descriptions in your break room so that the kennel assistant can go and say, what do I need to do? And then we can have that conversation. These don't need to be hidden secret documents that we bring out on onboarding and never touch again. These should be shared and encouraged for growth and opportunity.
Well, and celebrate that within the practice when Meghan becomes technician 2, that gets brought up in the weekly meeting or the memo that goes out. Hey, congratulate Meghan when you see her. She just made technician 2 or lead technician or whatever that might be. Or the kennel attendant got into technician 1. Right. And so, again, it builds that culture of accountability and, hey, this is where you can go, especially as you mentioned, things have changed a lot in the 20 years you've been in the animal health world. And so, trying to retain those key team members, anything you can do to get a leg up.
Right. Retention is so important. So, right. It's so much easier to keep them than to rehire them.
So so talking about this kind of progression and improvement, how important are professional performance improvement plans for enhancing staff performance? And just speak a little bit about that and things that you've done in your career managing, a single practice all the way up to 25 locations in that key component, making sure you have success in the veterinary setting.
So I love a performance improvement plan for so many reasons. I love them for a paper trail, right? That's really important these days.
Both
I love it because,
bad, right?
Yes. Yeah. I never want anyone to be fired as a surprise, right? If you should always know what's expected of you. If you stepped out of bounds, we're going to have that conversation. And if you step out of bounds again, that's on you. So I really love a performance improvement plan because it's subjective, objective. It's not, I'm not picking on you. We have a specific thing that we're working on. This is what you did. This is what we need to do. And we're going to give you 2 weeks to not screw up filling prescriptions. And if in those 2 weeks it happens, then we're either going to send you to some CE, or we're going to take away the ability to do it, or we're going to let you go. So you set it up and then you put it back on the employee. I'll help you as much as I can. I'll provide you with the resources if you need additional training or some sort of skill set that we need to work on. I'm happy to do it, but I have laid the foundation between the job descriptions, what we expect of you. So there's really no surprises. And I love that because everyone fears this being mean. No one I don't want to fire people. I would much rather have a staff that's productive and happy and compliant. But sometimes that's not always the case.
Yeah, a question that gets thrown around and is not a favorite amongst the team at Butler Vet Insurance is, well, if you were sitting in my chair, what would you do? It's that old parent question. Well, Bill, Billy, what do you think your punishment should be? I was like, I don't think you should punish me at all, is my answer when I was a kid, but it didn't fly really far because, the response was, well, there's going to be a punishment. What do you think it should be? And what do you think is fair? And, people generally try and do a good job. I mean, there's always the outliers, both good and bad, but generally people want to try and do a good job, and they know when they haven't, and they're good team members. If you're hiring the right team member, they'll own up to that. And so, it's that question of, well, what would you do if you were me? And then, kind of the follow-up is, as you said, is laying out the plan and say, well, this is what happened and this is what we're going to do to remedy the situation. And so it isn't surprise, because it's not fair to the team member to say, well, this has been happening for 6 months. It's a problem. Right. You're gone. It's like, well, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. That's when the employment law attorney gets brought into it, and you get that employment practice case brought against you where wrongful termination is like, I wasn't counseled, I wasn't advised. So-and-so has been doing this for 9 months, and I've only screwed it up for 4, and they've been screwing it up for 9 months, and I got fired because they don't like me.
Yeah. Well, I think too, there's like if everyone else is cranky about it, if we're all talking about Bill being on his cell phone, but no one said like, hey, get off your phone, like that's not fair. So just being like forward and direct and like open communication it just makes it a smoother process for everybody.
Yeah. I'm always on my cell phone. It's a real problem around the practice.
I would probably call you out on it if you had an animal in front of you and you were on your cell phone. That would be a no-no.
How big a problem is that at practices these days?
Well, I mean, I would always feel guilty, right? Because my cell phone is my email, the clients are texting me, the employees are texting me. So it's really hard. Plus it's such a resource. It's a calculator. It's a website that you need.
Yep.
So I think some hard and fast rules, never under anesthesia, right? Never when walking an animal outside, never when you've got an animal that's your responsibility in front of you in the table. But like, if I need to research what a drug is, like I should be able to just use my phone. So it's such a slippery slope.
I think it also depends on classification of job, right? Like if you're a DVM and you're, looking something up, that's one thing. Yeah. If you're a kennel attendant, you probably don't need to have your cell phone should be in your locker in the team room.
Also, I'd rather if you're getting like we had our X-ray computer got porn viruses all the time, right? Because that's a door, and I would much rather that happen on someone's personal cell phone than on a work computer.
Yeah, absolutely. Plug for cyber liability insurance in the podcast to protect yourself from that stuff. So, talking about scaling an operation, you brought one vet practice up to a 12 vet practice in your early career in management, and then you transitioned from that to managing a 25 practice emergency and urgent care network. What are some of the things besides the foundational components that you see either are one or two things you have to do to scale? And then what are a couple of mistakes that you see veterinary practices making over and over again that they don't, it's like, if you only did this, it'd be a lot easier to scale.
I think the easy answer for both of those, right, is like you have to be willing to try some new things and to take some risks. Like if I'm going to grow this, I can't just 12 doctors can't do vaccines all day long. Like I need to have something else that we're doing. I brought in acupuncture. We have a laser. We're doing more dentistry, like these kind of things. Maybe you can bring on house calls. You can do telemed. Like there's so many growth opportunities now that you can't just, unless you just want to be a vaccine clinic, like you've got to be open to trying new things.
One of our practices did a holistic center they actually rented space next to their brick and mortar press. So they have a freestanding building. They actually rented space in a strip mall next to their practice. And that's where they do all the holistic chiropractic. Acupuncture isn't in the main practice. It's in their ancillary holistic medicine next door. And so, and they couldn't expand that component inside their existing footprint. They said didn't have any physical room to expand the practice. So they had to lease space, but it allowed their practice to expand. Also, small benefit for them was they had a water issue that needed some address. And so they actually had to run the practice out of the side practice. But, to expand, you also have to give up some control, right? Like as the main DVM, probably have a lot of control stuff. Like you just can't do everything anymore. You have to have your practice manager doing stuff. You have to have some of these divisions of control, right?
Right. And that's when you need strong leads, right? Because I can no longer, I can't be in front of everybody. The owner can't be in front of everybody. So I depend on a strong lead technician to do this and a strong lead CSR to do that. Like you've got to, I'm not going to make a schedule for 50 people. I'm not going to remember everybody's birthday and do all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So to make it still have those personal touches, you have to develop a strong team for sure and give up some of the control.
In our world of the insurance world, and a lot of the agents that I network with, we basically say, if somebody can do it 80% as good as I can do it, I'll take that as you know, the name on the building or whatever. You know, if somebody could do, and I'm not a veterinarian. I have no certifications in the veterinarian world. So I don't know if a surgery at 80% of what I could do is good enough, but you know, just the mindset of it doesn't have to be me touching everything. It doesn't have to be as perfect as I would do it.
I always said I wanted to be missed, but I still wanted to be able to leave, right? Like I want the building not to burn down. And I want you to be like, oh, we're so happy you're back. But like the world doesn't end because I go on vacation. Like we still need to be. And I think that's a sign. I think that's a sign of a good manager, is somebody that like can leave the place running efficiently and sufficiently, and then come back. And then that affords the leads, the doctors, the owners, the managers to focus on, you know, revenue growth and new hires and that kind of thing, so that you're not always in the nitty gritty.
What's probably the biggest mistake you see when you have a practice trying to expand and it's limiting their growth? You know, I touched on the control component, but what's another one that you think is a biggie out there?
It's so hard because it's such a fine line of like employing people and keeping them happy and also serving our clients. I think that there's been a huge disconnect since COVID. It's like an us versus them now of the practice versus the clients. And like, we are here to serve the clients and serve the clients' pets. So I'm not saying, but like being closed on Saturdays. If I have a 9-to-5 job and you open at 9 and you close at 5 and you're not open on Saturdays, like where does my pet go? Then my pet no longer comes to you. So I think it's fine to close on Saturdays, but maybe then we need to open up, you know, some hours later in the day.
I see a lot of practices. I've actually got a couple of practices that they're not full urgent care, but they're running expanded hours and they're running multiple shifts. So from an expansion standpoint, they're saying, well, we're going to stay open till 9 o'clock and we're going to be open on Saturday from 11 till 5 or 6 and run Saturday hours and run evening hours. And maybe not that, you know, full true urgent care where somebody's bringing in a cat with a broken leg, but saying, hey, you know, we'll take, well, I mean, if my vet was open and my cat Louie broke his leg, I'd probably go to my vet instead of the University of Minnesota, because the rate's going to be different for the client, right? The urgent care component, but potentially not, but you know, generally overall, it's not that urgent care pricing. And so, you know, I think that's an area for expansion, is saying, well, if we want to expand, maybe we just run some extended hours in different shifts, right?
I think we just have to meet our clients and what our clients need. And every practice is different and every neighborhood demographic is different. So maybe you're in a retirement community and no one has a job and they can come to you at 2:00 on a Wednesday.
Sure.
But that's not always the case. So maybe we take drop-offs. You want to drop off on your way to work and pick up on your way from home? Great, we got you. We have to be willing to meet our clients where they need us, or else you're not going to have any clients, right? Somebody's meeting their needs if it's not you.
I have one practice who's explored and is going to implement pet taxi, where they do pickup and delivery of the animals. So they'll come to your house.
Insurance on that? What does that look like?
It's actually not too bad, as long as no humans are in the car. They don't get. It's not as the delivery component, which is the insurance commercial term for driving somebody, or if you're a taxi driver, it's livery, old school animal terms, right? And so they, as long as there's no humans in the vehicle, the humans not riding with the animal to the practice, it's not as much of a liability, because if you get into a car accident and the animal's hurt, it's just like the veterinary professional liability or animal Bailey component of your vet professional. It's just the property. If a human's in the car, now you have all these extra costs for the urgent care and the bodily injury. And just like if you're involved in a car accident, you know, and you're riding in an Uber. So Yeah, it was
That's great
interesting.
though, right?
It is.
That's very unique. And I would think that your clients would love it.
It actually came up because I was doing it was a local practice here in Minnesota. I was doing an in-person visit, and they had on the refrigerator in their bake room, they had, practice taxi. And I was like, tell me about that. They said, yeah, we're thinking about doing it. I said, I'm glad I'm here because I don't know that you would have told. Let's talk about that for a second.
I was talking to somebody who wants to she's got a great big backyard and she wants to put like a swing set, a jungle gym in the backyard for kids. And I was like, hey, I think that's a very unique idea, but you need to call your insurance.
I would call your insurance agent. I'm the no fun guy. My wife's like, oh, if I have to hear about trampolines and German Shepherds and a house with no deck on the back anymore, or just, I wonder if their insurance agent knows they're doing that. It all boils down to communication. And you have a BA in communication, correct? Yep. So how important do you think communication, and you talked about this a little bit and touched on it, but as we start to wrap up here, what, from a communication perspective, how important is communication as it relates to your practice and your day-to-day operations, both with clients and your team members?
I mean, I communicate every day, right? Like this is the base, this is the foundation of everything. And I often get accused of being mean because I am straightforward. But to me, like, it's not kind to be passive. It's not kind to like not tell someone they have spinach in their teeth.
Mm-hmm. Which my wife reminds me of when she does. She's like, how long have I had that there? I was like, I just saw it. I just saw that.
That means, right, you care for her and you care to be like uncomfortable and say like, oh, honey, you've got the spinach in your teeth. I think communication can be so like people just like fret and freak out and get all nervous about it. But like, I can walk by and say, hey, Bill, can you get off your cell phone? And that's a non-issue, right? I've told you what the problem was. We addressed it. We're all moving on. Like, I don't have to say like, can we talk in my office? And so I think that being honest and communicating with our clients the same way, like just being open and saying like, I did forget to trim your dog's nails. I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get them done now, or I'll comp you later. Like owning up to our mistakes. We don't need to be defensive. We don't need to be angry. As a manager and a leader, like I'm not going to argue with my staff. Like this isn't up for debate. Like you can't have your ear pods in when you're answering the phones.
Surgery.
I mean, there's just some things like
sure.
that you can just be straightforward and have that conversation and move on to the next thing. And it's so important. I mean, how else are people going to know anything?
I'm in a very information heavy industry with insurance. We have to explain a lot of different stuff, a lot of different ways. And we say all the time, email and text are for information. The phone is for communication. I think we've now as a society fallen back on, we're trying to get information from a veterinary practice about their insurance or whatever. And we're like, well, I've emailed them and texted them 5 times. Like, have we picked up the phone and called them yet?
Right.
And so, it still boils down to having that conversation versus, well, I sent 5 emails to the client. They haven't responded yet. It's like, well, if you call and leave a voicemail and you email them and you text them, you'll probably get a response versus just sending an email. And also, it's the information that you need to impart in that phone conversation or that in-person conversation or phone conversation versus trying to give the information over an email.
It's transactional. It's conversational versus like informative, right?
Yeah.
I want to be able to refer back to an email. Let's give me some bullet points. You have a question about the nuance of my staff. That's a phone call.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate the time today, Megan. I think if you could leave one nugget of information for our listeners, 20 years of experience, everything you've done, let me rephrase this another way. What has come up the most since you started consulting at Granite Peak Associates? What's the one thing you've probably said more than anything else to the clients as you've worked from there transitioning to consulting? What's come up the most?
Gosh, I like your first question better. Wait, my first question, let me answer both.
Answer both.
Because I think your first question leads into, I think that surrounding yourself with smart people is the way to go. Like, I know vet med really well, and I don't know insurance. I know vet med really well, and I don't know tax laws. I don't know, legal things. So I think that having like a strong support team and outsourcing the things that are important enough that need to be recognized, like the insurance and the taxes and the things like that. So I think that is a big lesson to learn. Like, you should not be digging around in these things that you don't have.
Trying to figure out the new FTC non-compliant rules for the full-time wages and or the non-competes and what constitutes a non-compete versus piracy non-solicitation.
I mean, honestly, we can't even fill out W-4s anymore. Those don't even make sense. So like, why on earth? And Google only gives you the answer that Google thinks you need. So like, those days of trying to figure out that stuff is over. So I think surround yourself with smart people. The things that are coming up the most is like getting your people and your cogs in line. I think
because now you're digging into numbers because you're working at a CPA firm that's doing tax preparation and a lot of that numerical analysis. So you're probably digging into the numbers a lot more across a huge range of practices.
And it's so much, can I afford to hire somebody? Can I, and so like I've been going through and looking at a lot of pricing. Are we priced correctly? Well, why are you charging less than your cost? Or why is your 50 milligram half the price of your 25 milligram? Like there's just some things that like we kind of like set and forget that I think it would behoove us to go back and check on those kind of things.
Well, those are two awesome pieces of advice, Megan, is reviewing some of those number components and using an outside source to do it who has a lot more experience or is just seeing a lot more than you are potentially.
Or time. I've got time to do it and lots of people don't,
Correct. Well, where can people find you if they want to connect with you on a little bit deeper relationship? How do they connect with you or engage with you either online or in the world of the internet?
Oh, for sure. I'm trying to grow my LinkedIn. Like I'm not very savvy on like Facebook or Instagram or any of those things, but I do really enjoy LinkedIn for professional connections. So that's Meghan Bingham. I'm going to be at Hive. You're going to be at Hive.
So what's funny is I live in Minnesota. And they hired me to be a Hive speaker out in Anaheim.
Yeah.
I think they were just booked out when they were doing their booking. But you're going to be at Hive June. I'm not sure if this podcast will be out by then, but so you're out on the speaking circuit. You're out and about, and then also Granite Peak Associates. They're based out on the East Coast, but you're virtual. You're nationwide, so you work with all of their clients because they're a nationwide firm. And we'll have some of that information. But what's the website for Granite Peak Associates? Granite Peak Associates.
Yeah, it's granitepeakcpa.com. So the beauty of that is that they do your taxes and I'm included. So I'm just like an added bonus. So there's no like additional Meghan time. Like I'm just included in all of the other wonderful things that we do.
So let me get this right. I'm a vet practice. I hate dealing with taxes and numbers, and I want to work with a CPA firm that specializes in doing taxes and numbers specifically for animal health and vet med. So I engage Granite Peak Associates, and then you just come along as free consulting to help because I'm a client of Granite Peak Associates.
Correct. So I'm on the onboarding call, right? We're going to talk about your pain points then, and then we meet quarterly. So as we're going through your P&L, we can also say like, hey, is this number correct? Or how can we work on this together? And so then I'm the additional resource for that. I'm the, because it's always like the what you like, you can tell me. And then it's like, well, great, but how do I do that? What next? I'm the what then.
Gotcha. So the CPAs say, hey, you need to improve this number. And you're the person that says, hey, if you do this and this, it helps improve that number.
Right.
Perfect. Well, I know the team at Granite Peak. I got to meet them down at West Vet. Jared and Heather were down there, and they've got a great team at Granite Peak. And Meghan is now part of that team, assisting veterinarians with improving their numbers as identified by the CPA team at Granite Peak. So, well, thanks so much for the time, Meghan, and really appreciated having you on.
This was great. Thank you so much.
As always, everyone, remember to like, share, and review the podcast. It helps with all of our algorithm and numbers. Share it with your friends, and we're excited to have you listen in on our next episode of the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast.